West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
This issue, this abortion issue, is turning into a remarkably politically potent issue for people who want a return to, where the United States was for about 50 years, where women had a right to make healthcare decisions and make choices about their own bodies. We've seen in Kansas, we've seen in Kentucky, we've seen in one red state after another. We saw in a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin landslide victories, all because Republicans are taking extremist views. And we saw it last night in a state that has gone deep red, Ohio.
Red. Yes, voters overwhelmingly rejected a Republican-backed measure that would have made it more difficult to change the state's constitution. More than 3 million people went to the polls in Ohio's special election, voting to defeat Issue 1, which keeps the threshold for passing future constitutional amendments at a simple majority.
This is all about abortion.
Than 60% supermajority that was proposed.
And of course, this is all about abortion because they were going to have a referendum this fall. And suddenly the pro-life groups and the Republican legislators, Caddy, decided we're going to rig things. We're going to change the rules. We're going to require 60% because we know the majority of the people don't want women to have their health care decisions decided by men and state legislators. 57% of Ohioan voters say no to rigging the process. 43% said yes. But, Gaddy, that almost certainly ensures that this fall, Ohio will be yet another Republican state that pushes back against the abolition of Roe.
Yeah, Republicans wanted to make it so that you couldn't change a law in the part of the Constitution without 60%, having 60%. For decades, it's been 50%. That's been fine for all the other amendments that they've had in the past. But when abortion was on the ballot, they wanted to make it that much harder for pro-abortion rights people to do it. Actually, that 57% is not far off the 60% that they were mandating. What's extraordinary about this is that it's August. A quarter of Ohioans. August. This is not even a vote on abortion. This is a vote on an amendment to the Constitution that is potentially about abortion. And even so, Ohioans turned out in huge numbers, and the campaign that had been campaigning on pro-abortion rights had thought this might be close. This reminds me of Kansas. This reminds me of that first vote we had where we were all surprised by the margin of the victory for the pro-abortion rights group. And here we are, a good more than a year after Dobbs, and it is is still rallying people 57%. That's a big victory for the pro-abortion rights group.
A huge victory, just like a huge victory in Wisconsin, a state that's always been very close. Mm-hmm. A huge victory in Kansas, another state that was red. Time and time again, you look at these polls, that they just don't tell the tale. People like a year and a half out, are you going to vote for the guy that, for people that don't follow closely, it's like, are we going to vote for the guy who falls off his bike and stutters once in a while, or the guy who tried to take over the federal government with a riot and said he wanted to terminate the Constitution? And then you don't put other issues in there, and suddenly you get closer, and it's just like 2022. Remember the red wave of 2022? Yeah. Neither do I. You know why? Never happened. You know why it never happened? Abortion's a big issue. Also, some people, I know it's quaint if you write this morning for the Wall Street Journal editorial page or on Fox News. Some people love American democracy. We're kind of old-fashioned that way. I don't know. It's worked for us for 240 or so years. We'd like to keep it for another 240 years. So you had abortion and actually American democracy? Yeah. Because Americans aren't as stupid as editorial writers of the Wall Street Journal editorial page over the past week have believed them to be. They see through the lies, they see through the gaslighting, and they decide, hey, this is really troubling what this guy, maybe this guy over here could ride a bike if he wasn't sweating so much. This other guy, he falls off a bike once in a while. But wait a second. He actually believes in the Constitution of the United States. You add that and abortion together. Yeah. And it has been a potent political punch in the gut against Republicans who've been trying to take away women's rights.
And women's rights. You bring up a good point here, because I think what we're seeing here is that men and women are seeing health care being taken away from their families, from their loved ones. And while it is an issue of a woman's right to choose, it's also an issue of family's health, of a husband watching her husband, his wife have to bleed out because she can't get him the medication she needs for a fetal abnormality. This is an issue now that goes across the board. Right. And men and women understand what has happened over the past few years with rights being taken away.
And when you
to health care.
When you look, Sam Stein, at these numbers, 59% in Kansas, 57% in Ohio, again, red states, a landslide victory in a Supreme Court race up in Wisconsin that the Republicans called the most important race in years. Right. When you see that happening, you don't get to 57 to 58, 59% with only the women that went to the Women's March, like in 2017. You don't get there with left-wing activists. You don't get there with women. You get there with women, men, young, old,
Thank you.
Black, white, Hispanic, you name it. This is an issue that cuts across all demographics, and it's shocking to me that the Republicans still have their head buried in the sand on this issue, because another election, I don't know if they know it or not, is coming up next year.
Yeah, Tamika's point, men are involved in the pregnancy. Obviously, we don't carry the burden of the pregnancy, but we know what happens. We're there with our wives. We feel very much part of the process, and I think it resonates, the issue of abortion, for men as much as women. And if you look at the issue on ideological grounds, there's a recent poll that showed that something like 35 to 40% of Republicans were upset over the Dobbs decision. Those numbers don't really happen in many other issues. And I think the proof now is in the pudding, so to speak. We have 3 major elections, probably more are missing, Kansas, Wisconsin, and Ohio, where it's very evident that abortion rights is an incredible motivator. I would just add that in Ohio, Kathy's right. They tried to sneak this in on some municipal election in the middle of August. Yeah. It was fairly transparent what the anti-choice crowd was trying to do. And I think that backfired pretty badly, obviously, with voters who felt like they were just being hoodwinked, who felt like they were being taken advantage of. It's already a bold proposition to ask voters to willingly vote to reduce their ability to change their state's constitution in the future. Right. But to do it in the fashion that they did, that these organizers did, to try to sneak it in a municipal election in August, I think was insulting, frankly, to a lot of Ohioans, and it proved to be insulting by these numbers.
Think about Donald Trump's Republican Party. One, they try to take away a presidential election. Two, they line up in support, and I won't name the editorial page again that does it. They line in support of a fake electors conspiracy plot, right? That their own people knew was unconstitutional, that their own people knew would be overturned by the United States Supreme Court, but they were doing it to confuse the issue and to delay a constitutional process. And they wanted to throw out the votes of millions and millions of Americans in 7 states. Then we'll go to Tennessee. Again, more anti-democracy nonsense. They actually kick black members of the Tennessee legislature out because they dare raise their voices. They let the white woman stay in, by the way. That's interesting. Justice blind? I don't know. Republicans certainly aren't blind. You're a black legislator in Tennessee and you speak up and speak out, they kick you out, right? And now you go to Ohio, and what do we have? You first of all have the women of Ohio have the right to make health care decisions for themselves. Are parents of 10-year-old girls who are raped, who have to flee the state so they can make healthcare decisions themselves. First, Republicans take that right away from Ohio women and Ohio families and Ohio doctors. Then they come up with this scheme and they say, and now we're going to take away your right to amend the Constitution the way we've done it for years. And we're going to sneak it in August. And you're going to now have to get 60%. To try to claw back to get the right we've already taken away from women in Ohio and across America. And as Scotty said before, this is August. Yep. August is such a dead month politically. I will tell you, any campaigns, the 4 campaigns I ran, you basically shut down in August.
Right.
Because everybody's gone. Nobody's focused on anything. They're finishing their vacations or they're getting their kids ready back for school. They're getting ready for the fall. They're getting ready for everything. And as Caddy said, Ohio voters flooded to the polls to tell these anti-democracy Republicans, no. One person, one vote, majority rules in these referendums. You can't change the rules midstream because you want to continue taking away the rights of women to make decisions over their own bodies.
It is Wednesday, the 9th of August of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, our little Yorkie, is the door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special, daily special, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? And it is plural here. I know that the original quote really only denoted one. And it was the bishop himself, Mr. Becket. Mr.? I don't know if they called him Mr., but nonetheless, in this construct and in this plane of existence, it'll be plural as in priests, because they're coming at us from all sides. That's right. Oh, and it's only aspirational, by the way, for those of you who may think untoward thoughts about our intentions. Because our intentions really is that Smothered Benedict Wednesdays honors a lovely egg dish with a velvety hollandaise sauce. Yummy. Okay. With a little bit of smoked ham, maybe. How are you today? Well, are you happy? That's right. Ohio voters were able to go to the polls in the dead of August, when right after the Republicans tried to keep any type of special elections from happening in August. And the reason for that is the same reason that they just had an election in August, is that they didn't want, initially, when they said no more special elections in August, because, we we started beating them at their own game. Oh, well, if you're going to keep the least amount of people from voting, we're just going to come in here and push through a few amendments and measures when no one's looking, just like you guys do. Republicans did not like that, and so they set up a special election to pretty much destroy democracy as we know it, because it would have been duplicated in states around the nation. And instead, in the defense of that democracy by the voters, who came out in droves, that's right, flooded the polls, 3 million in August in Ohio, said, nope, you're not going to pull a fast one on us. 50% was so okay all these decades, 100 years or more. But now for this one, when women say, we've had enough with this Roe v. Wade BS. A bought-off, corrupt MAGA court rammed through something that should never have even been heard, predicated upon lies. And also, I'll just reiterate, patting the pockets of the MAGA court. Let's take them on junkets. Let's let their wives be heads of organizations that will foment an insurrection against the United States of America, and then we'll really be rolling in the dough. There was a reason why the founders said, we really don't want to have a bunch of corporatists and deep-pocketed oligarch types telling us that, hey, since I gave you a bunch of money, pass this. Because they don't have national allegiances. They're only allegiances to who and what they can make money from. If fascism makes some money, that's where they're going to go. How else to explain a Ben Shapiro? How else to explain a Tucker Carlson? Yeah, they're getting deep-pocketed money thrown their way. Rebecca Mercer and Peter Thiel, yeah, they're going to give some money to old Tucker for his podcast. I got to tell you, that production value, we're living on a shoestring, and the production values are better than his. Well, mostly. But nonetheless, you get my drift. We don't have George Soros throwing money our way to indoctrinate the youth, because apparently that's not our MO. That's not our purpose. And so therefore, by dint of that alone, it's not a moneymaker. Oh, you're trying to help people? That costs money. That doesn't make money. We want to indoctrinate our youth. We've already been doing it. How else to explain pet rocks? I'd like to actually, maybe I always say, I wish that somebody would. Maybe I should just do it myself and stop talking about other people doing it. Maybe that should be a lesson for us all. But regardless, a study has to be made about the correlation of those who fell under the spell of pet rocks, Cabbage Patch Kids, and all the riotous behavior that revolved around that, and voting for Trump and being a MAGA. I'm just wondering, because there's a whole slew of people, 73 million by last count, and now is it more? I hope not. 73 million who were brainwashed into believing that Donald Trump, of all people, was a successful businessman. Bankrupted casinos. Who bankrupts casinos? Nobody. Got so bad I keep harping on this, but this is common knowledge. Everybody knows this. We saw it in real time. The Italian mob said, you're not getting any more money from us, and the only people left were the New York Russian mob, and he started laundering their money through his casinos, and that's the story of that. Jeez. But now, according to them, Joe Biden is the international crime boss. Yeah, right. I'm not even saying that this guy Trump is competent enough to be a crime boss even in New York, because apparently he wasn't. If you can't get the Italian mob to give you any more money for a casino, that means you're pretty incompetent. Oh, let's make him president. And why was that? Because he was just crazy enough to push through the fascist agenda that we're having now, and the guy has delusions of grandeur. Why else plaster your name on high rises so people know it was you who did it? Yeah, 2 trunkless legs of stone in the middle of the desert. Look upon my great works. Okay. We're all gonna be dust in the dustbin, Donnie. It's the way of life. Okay, so here we are. His sycophants are already talking about, well, if we don't get our way, it's going to be curtains for you. Von Hilliard this morning was just, he looked scared. Like he had never heard this before. Come on, Von, get out a little bit more, will you? We've been putting up with this BS for a few years. But, yeah, this MAGA lady was asked, well, what do you think's going to happen when, and if Trump gets convicted? And immediately she said civil war. We can't live like that. And they call themselves Americans. They hate America. And the thing that they hate more than America are Americans. Because Americans, of course, as we know, is the great, diverse, multicultural, multi-denominational mass that we are. The America of goodwill, the good neighbor policy. Hi, neighbor. MAGA they hate their neighbors if they're not, I don't know, up to snuff to whatever it is that they're, I don't know, God. And why would I want to be a MAGA? Have you ever been into a MAGA house? A lot of people think that MAGA is like a bunch of poor people with beer bellies. No, they're a bunch of, I was corrected too, burgermeisters are not the rich fellows in the villages. It's the mayor. But there were a few rich burgermeisters in Germany that I still think had something to do. But the industrialists of the day, the big business guys, and even the small business people, put their lot behind you know who wrote my struggle. And we got the same sort of situation here. MAGA, by and large, are not poor, destitute people. They're business owners. I mean, how else can they afford these monster trucks? Boats that they can sink on a regular every year. Every year they have regattas on our lakes, streams, rivers, bays, tributaries, and they sink their boats. They get swamped and they sink their boats every year. And they got enough money to do that every year. Plus their monster truck assault vehicles that they can drive as caravans into urban areas of America to scare the locals in those urban areas of America. And who are the locals in mostly those urban areas of America? They call them urban because of a particular hue of the pigment of the people, they think. They're rich. They got armories. You know how much it costs to buy one gun? They got hundreds in some cases, and all the ammo and accoutrements that you need. Harnesses, silencers, scopes, drones. They got it all. It's not cheap. Then they got to store it. They got big old mega McMansions. That's what they're called, McMansions. Well, guess all we have is our sheer numbers, our intellect, and our knowledge that we are not going to let this happen. We didn't before. We're not going to now. Okay, I guess I'm off my my pulpit. Let us give you a rundown of what we do have in store for you. Of course, we did touch upon the Ohio success last night, where Americans are actually telling, MAGA Republicans, no, we're not going to let you white Christian supremacist types take over. F you. This is America. Okay? Okay. Well, on the heels of that, Ohio voters soundly defending democracy has given fire to an Arizona effort to enshrine abortion rights in their state constitution. Yes, indeed. Continuing on in the Bistro Cafe, California is ill-equipped to investigate whether racism played a role in the death of a pregnant black woman at Centinela Hospital in Los Angeles. And the Oregon Secretary of State announced that voter-backed Measure 113 disqualifies 10 Republican and independent senators who participated in a 6-week walkout this spring from running for re-election. Too bad. Boo-hoo. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where hackers may have information on tens of millions of British voters after they got access to electoral registers. But it's even worse than that. And New Zealand is partnering with U.S. investment giant BlackRock, BlackRock, in its aim to reach 100% renewable electricity. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Page at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln, who is very busy. So we thank Kelly for doing those duties and everything else that she does. Plus, also, just to remind folks, she and Ricky have a show Saturday night, Sunday morning called the Late Night Morning Talk Show. The Late Night Early Morning Talk Show. There, I'll get it out. With Kelly and Ricky. So check it out. And, of course, podcasts are available. So check out Kelly and Ricky when you can. Across the page from that chat room link is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it would really help us. And how does it help us? I'll tell you how it helps. It helps us pay our bills. And if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, we'll come up with another example someday. But anyway, if you could send those funds our way once a month, thereby becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does put a big dent in the bills that we have to pay to keep this powerhouse of resisting, and we've had it resisting for over a dozen years. And since it seems to be getting only worse, we can't quit. Not that we would want to anyway, but certainly not now. So thank you for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. All kidding aside, we thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, yeah, we're still there, but only for a little bit. And also on Mastodon and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of all of those. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, wherever, at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime. Automatically, I just put it in the queue, push the little buttons, schedule it, and there it is. It just pops up automatically 10 minutes before showtime. And you can find the actual reportage by going to those show notes and links, and you can find it through my social media feeds. So there. You can follow the show on Twitter. It's only a placemat. I'm going to do more with it on the other platforms, I promise. But you can find the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And please, please, please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., 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 except etc. does not include Stitcher because apparently Sirius XM doesn't want Stitcher to live. And so it died. Thank you, Sirius XM. Thanks a lot. Okay. Have to get a few things off my chest, and we do. We do that. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Washington Post, and it is penned by Rachel Rubin and Yvonne Wingett-Sanchez. Major abortion rights groups launched a bid yesterday, Tuesday, to enshrine abortion protections in the Arizona Constitution, setting off a high-stakes battle in a politically divided swing state that was once reliably Republican. The effort represents the latest attempt by abortion rights groups to counteract bans in states across the country, and Arizona advocates said they believe the public is on their side. Abortion rights supporters scored major victories during last year's midterm elections and have since begun ballot measure campaigns in a handful of Republican-led states such as Ohio, yeah, won that one, Florida, and Missouri. Arizona for Abortion Access, the new political action committee supporting the ballot measure, filed proposed language for a constitutional amendment with the Arizona Secretary of State's office on Tuesday. So in other words, it wasn't on the heels of this great victory, but even before the polls closed, which I think portends a juggernaut that MAGA Republicans and their deep-pocketed Christian nationalist donors are fearing. Here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, is out of the Los Angeles Times by Sarah Kwan from the Kaiser Family Foundation Health News. Anya was ready to leave. She was dressed in a fuzzy white onesie her mother had packed for her first trip home, yet Anya's family had more questions than answered as they cradled the newborn out of the hospital, her mother's body left behind. April Valentine, a 31-year-old black mother, died while giving birth in Inglewood on January 10th. Her family has raised questions about improper care. Why didn't nurses investigate numbness and swelling in her legs? Symptoms she reported at least 10 times over the course of 15 hours. Why did it take nearly 20 hours for her doctor to see her after she arrived at the hospital, already in labor? Valentine's family wants the state to investigate how she died and whether systemic or interpersonal racism could have played a role. Los Angeles politicians and media have amplified their demands. I think she would have been treated differently if she was white, said Valentine's cousin, Makisha Mack, who filed a complaint. The official cause of death was a blood clot that formed in her leg and traveled to her lung, a preventable condition. The state has issued a $75,000 fine to Centinela Hospital for risking the health and safety of Valentine, and an inspection reports suggest it failed to properly assess her risk for blood clots, take precautions, and alert her physician. Centinela announced last month that it would close its maternity services on October 25th. Even so, the odds of finding discrimination and getting justice remain stacked against her family. The status of the state's investigation is not clear, and a federal investigation is pending. The hospital and Valentine's OB/GYN deny allegations of improper care and reject assertions by some family members that Valentine's care team, which was largely black, would have harbored bias toward her. But a Kaiser Family Foundation Health News analysis shows state authorities are ill-equipped to investigate discrimination complaints and often avoid finding hospitals that violate regulations. That highlights a big gap in the state's ability to hold doctors and hospitals accountable when it comes to reducing bias in maternity care. Aiming to reduce stark health disparities, in 2019, California became the first state to require implicit bias training for maternity care providers. But the state has not penalized physicians and hospitals that treat patients inequitably, as it has not found discrimination in the incidents brought to its attention. Neither of the agencies overseeing healthcare facilities and physicians, the California Department of Public Health and the Medical Board of California, has found discrimination despite hundreds of complaints going back a decade. In the unlikely event that regulators find discrimination, they usually prefer corrective actions for violations, such as improvement plans as opposed to penalties. Karen Smith, a physician who led the Department of Public Health from 2015 to 2019, said the agency wants to push hospitals to provide high-quality care, not shut them down. So when one violates a regulation, the agency typically tries to help it remedy the problem, depending on the severity. The medical board has come under fire for avoiding meaningful penalties, even for grossly negligent doctors. California's rate of maternal deaths is among the lowest in the country, but is up to 3.6 times as high for black women as for women of other races. Multiple factors, including systemic racism and provider bias, implicit or not, are thought to contribute to this disparity. Valentine's is not the only high-profile death of a black mother whose family said her care providers dismissed. Goldberg of the Oregonian brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. 10 Republican and independent senators who participated in a 6-week walkout this spring will not be allowed to run for re-election, Secretary of State LaVon Griffin-Vilade announced yesterday, Tuesday. Griffin-Vilade wrote that she views voter-approved Measure 113 as disqualifying Oregon lawmakers who received 10 or more unexcused absences during the 2023 legislative session from running for election in 2024. That was clearly what voters intended, even though wording of the full text of the measure said absentee lawmakers couldn't run in the election after their term, whereas lawmakers run for re-election about 2 months before the term ends. But ballot language and media coverage all communicated to voters that the punishment for absences would impact lawmakers in their next term, not a later one. It is clear voters intended Measure 113 to disqualify legislators from running for re-election to a term immediately following the one in which they have 10 or more unexcused absences, the Secretary of State said in a statement. My decision honors the voters' intent by enforcing the measure the way it was commonly understood when Oregonians added it to our state constitution. Voters approved Measure 113 in November as an attempt to crack down on walkouts at the legislature, which Republicans used in 2019 and 2020 to kill priority bills for Democrats, including greenhouse gas cap-and-trade proposals. Well, it was a lot more than that. But the ambiguous language in the measure came under scrutiny after Republicans once again used the walkout tactic during the 2023 legislative session to get Democrats to water down bills on gun control and reproductive health care. Measure 113 states that lawmakers who receive 10 or more unexcused absences shall be disqualified from holding office as a senator or representative for the term following the election after the member's current term is completed. Boycotting Republicans have argued that the language will enable them to run for re-election in 2024, but not 2028. The Secretary of State's office, however, argued in a press release that courts have emphasized that the text of adopted ballot measures must be interpreted in a way that is consistent with the voters' intent. And voters universally understood Measure 113 would prohibit legislators who accumulate 10 or more unexcused absences during a legislative session from holding office in the immediate next term. Okay, good. Let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, it's a Barbie world. Barbie is more than a toy. She's a bona fide icon who's been part of the lexicon for more than 7 decades and is loved nearly as much as she's reviled. There's a lot of complexity wrapped up in that 11-inch doll that can't even stand on her permanently arched feet, and Greta Gerwig's latest offering, Barbie, reflects that complexity. When we first meet our Barbie, played to the hilt by Margot Robbie, she's having a perfect day in Barbie Land, where she's just one of many Barbies, also having perfect days. In fact, every day and everything is perfect in the pink, matriarchal-ruled Barbie Land. However, our heroine has recently been plagued with ideas with which no other Barbie has ever had to deal. These include thoughts of death and, to the absolute horror of all, the appearance of cellulite on Barbie's once perfect legs. Following the advice of Weird Barbie, a scene-stealing Kate McKinnon, Barbie learns she must travel to the real world, aka LA, so hopefully all can be made perfect again in Barbie Land. Tagging along for the ride is Ken, a delightful Ryan Gosling, who learns along with Barbie that the real world truly is different from Barbie Land. Barbie quickly learns that many in the real world view her very existence as problematic, and rather than to build girls up, she can be used as a tool of the patriarchy to crush the self-esteem of girls and even women who grew up playing with Barbies and who still see the dolls as the embodiment of the ideal woman. While Barbie's central theme, that being an actual woman in the real world is really tough, isn't new, the approach the movie takes is totally fresh and fun and seemingly deserving of its Movie of the Summer status. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. Today we introduce our series on civil rights for the Civil Discourse, an American Legacy Project. I'm Donna Phillips, and today we are joined by special guest Dr. Lester Brooks, American History Professor Emeritus from Anne Arundel Community College. Welcome, Dr. Brooks.
Thank you.
Great to have you here today.
Thank you.
Our question today is, what were civil rights at our country's founding?
During the Revolutionary era, a number of blacks had, those that could read the Declaration of Independence. Others were listening to the conversation, so they heard about these ideals that were presented in the Declaration of Independence. And certainly there was an urge to try and bring about emancipation. So petitions were written to some of the provincial legislatures. These ideas were floating. Many believed even that there was possibility of freedom during the war. So you find blacks sometimes supporting the Patriot cause, others supporting the British cause, because who was going to offer them freedom? And so that was one of the keys during that Revolutionary War, and it did impact the black community.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Brooks. This is all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civics only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1979. That was the day that young women workers at the YH Trading Company in Seoul, South Korea, staged a sit-in strike. The women made wigs for export. The company had been one of the leading exporters in the nation. But then the managers began to move the profits from the wig company to a shipping company under the same ownership, as well as to a film production company. This drained the profits from the wig factory and left it in massive debt. The owners shut down the company without warning, firing all of the employees. These women did not only lose their jobs. Water and electricity were turned off at the factory dormitories where the workers lived. A union represented the young women. The union planned a strike at the building, but the police were called in to break it up. The workers decided to move their protest to the local headquarters of the New Democratic Party. The party was in opposition to the leader of Seoul, President Park Chung-hee. the fired women were welcomed at the new Democratic Party headquarters. There, they decided to stage a sit-in to bring attention to their situation. The workers' sit-in only lasted 3 days. Then 1,000 police stormed the building. They overturned furniture and broke windows. They dragged the women out of the building violently. One woman, 21-year-old Kim Young-suk, died in the raid. She fell from the roof of the building in a clash with the police. 4 of the union leaders were sent to prison. More than 200 of the workers were expelled out of the city of Seoul and sent back home to rural areas. Today's Labor History in 2 brought to you in memory of Carol Hillman, a passionate friend of workers and volunteer of the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 62 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low 90s. Supposedly a bit cooler than yesterday. We'll see. Sunny conditions should prevail throughout the day with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Mostly clear overnight with lows in the upper 50s, low 60s. Winds continuing out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Then partly cloudy skies tomorrow and hot with highs in the mid to upper 90s. I wish it was only the 80s. And winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. So it looks like mid to upper 90s tomorrow. And then we'll be getting into triple digits by Sunday. Oh, boy. Grass pollen is rated low, though that's something's kicking my rear, if you can't tell. So I apologize for that. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 23 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is very high at level 8, so you know to take care. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.95 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 65%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 75 degrees and sunny. Paris is 74 and partly cloudy. Rome is 82 and sunny. Kabul is 76 degrees and clear. Kyiv is 75 and fair. Hong Kong is 85 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 81 and partly cloudy. Melbourne, Australia is 60 degrees and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 60 degrees and cloudy. Chicago, Illinois is 76 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York, New York is 81 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Hackers may have information on tens of millions of British voters after they got access to electoral registers. The UK's election watchdog said yesterday, Tuesday, nearly a year after the breach was discovered. Well, thanks. The Electoral Commission apologized for the breach, but said much of the information was already in the public domain, and that the names and addresses of people who registered to vote between 2014 and 2022 was unlikely to be used by hostile actors to sway election results. Really? The UK's democratic process is significantly dispersed, and key aspects of it remain based on paper documentation and counting, said Sean McNally, the Commission's chief executive, and another one of those great patronizing accents that we're so well known for here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. This means it would be very hard to use this cyber attack to influence the process. The Commission reported the breach to the Information Commissioner's office within 3 days of discovering it last October. No comment on why they waited until now to let everybody know.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Nick Perry of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. New Zealand's government said yesterday, Tuesday, it will partner with U.S. investment giant BlackRock in its aim to become one of the first nations in the world to have its electricity grid run entirely from renewable energy. The government said it was helping BlackRock launch a $1.2 billion fund to ramp up investments in wind and solar generation, as well as battery storage and green hydrogen. Some of the investment is expected to come from government-owned companies. New Zealand's electricity grid already runs off about 82% renewable energy after it dammed rivers decades ago to produce hydroelectric power. The government said it aims to reach 100% renewable generation by the end of this decade. The announcement comes 2 months out from an election, with the government hoping to burnish its green credentials. Critics point out the nation's overall greenhouse gas emissions has barely budged since the government symbolically declared a climate emergency in 2020. This is a game changer for the clean tech sector and an example of the pragmatic and practical steps the government's taking to accelerate climate action while actually growing our economy and creating jobs, Prime Minister Chris Hipkins told reporters in Auckland. Hipkins said the fund would allow New Zealand companies to produce intellectual property that could be commercialized across the world. BlackRock released few details about the $1.22 billion fund, but did say it would initially target institutional investors. It was the first time BlackRock had launched an initiative of its kind, said Andrew Landman, the head of BlackRock in Australia and New Zealand. BlackRock said making the grid completely green would require a total investment of about $26 billion U.S. BlackRock chief executive Larry Fink said on social media that the world is looking for models of cooperation between the private and public sectors to ensure an orderly, just, and fair energy transition. Yes, we would. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursday, so do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.